Former President Donald Trump's lawyer is expected to testify as early as today in front of a federal grand jury. This stems from the Justice Department's investigation into Trump's handling of classified materials discovered at Mar-a-Lago last August. Meanwhile, Monday is the next time a Manhattan grand jury is expected to meet. The panel will eventually decide whether or not to indict Trump in a separate case involving alleged hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa is following all of this from Washington for us. Good to see you. So what are investigators looking for in Corcoran's testimony?
Good morning. It's good to be with you. And it is often challenging to keep track of all of these legal cases that are surrounding former President Trump as he mounts his 2024 campaign. But in brief, Evan Corcoran is a lawyer for Donald Trump. He has been defending Trump and his point of view in both the classified records case and the ongoing investigation of January 6th. Under scrutiny today is Corcoran's interactions with Trump privately. A federal judge has said that Corcoran must share private notes, audio files, different memories about what Trump said to him privately. That's highly unusual because usually those kind of exchanges are protected under what's called attorney-client privilege. But that attorney-client privilege in this specific case was waived because the investigator, the special counsel Jack Smith, believes that obstruction by Trump might have taken place.
Yeah, it's a pretty high bar, so they must have some significant evidence to push them in that direction. In the meantime, what is going on with the Manhattan DA's probe into Donald Trump's alleged hush money payments? You know, he made the announcement he thought he was going to be arrested on Tuesday. Whether that was sincere or not is a whole other thing. But we're long past Tuesday, and it looks like we won't hear from the grand jury at the earliest. It won't be till next week.
It's a waiting moment right now, a crossroads in this New York investigation where the district attorney ultimately has to make a decision. Alvin Bragg needs to decide, does he want to present a case to this grand jury in Manhattan? I spent all week outside that criminal courthouse. We had some conversations all week, waiting to see if he would make a decision. CBS News has learned he will not make a decision on whether to present an indictment vote to the grand jury this week. It could happen as soon as next week, but it's important to remember that it also could not happen. In these types of investigations, prosecutors often will go up to the line of issuing an indictment, go the full scope of an investigation, and then decide maybe they're not going to move forward. And the decisions for that are often complicated because they're trying to figure out not only is it worth indicting someone for an alleged crime, but could they win that trial? And that's a calculation the district attorney has to make at the end of the day.
All right, so we've talked about the classified documents in Florida, the case going on here in New York. Now we take everyone to Washington, D.C. in the investigation into the January 6th assault on the Capitol. Yesterday, lawyers for former Vice President Mike Pence argued before a federal judge in D.C. that he should not have to testify about his dealings with Trump on and around January 6th of 2021. What is the argument there? And could Mike Pence be forced to testify?
He might be forced to testify, but at the end of the day, it could be the Supreme Court that ultimately decides. Pence has spoken openly about his experience on January 6th and his relationship with President Trump. He wrote a book about it. At the same time, Pence, as a former vice president, also has the title former president of the Senate. That's a title the vice president, any vice president, often always has. But it's one that doesn't get a lot of attention. But it's getting a lot of attention this week that Pence was a former president of the Senate, because Pence is citing that former role as a reason for why he should not testify, according to his lawyers. Because if you're president of the Senate, they're arguing you're part of Congress in some way. And because of the Constitution saying that there is a speech or debate clause prohibiting or allowing members of Congress to not testify about congressional proceedings in this way, he's saying maybe he doesn't need to testify under oath about January 6th. And it will be a thing for the Supreme Court down the line, possibly, to consider and to try to make a final decision on.
Okay, really quickly before we let you go, we learned of a Trump lawyer testifying back in December in front of a special counsel grand jury. What is that investigation about?
What we're learning is that Trump lawyers across the board are being asked about former President Trump's conduct when it comes to classified records, sometimes about his election conduct, because there's a belief in different prosecutorial realms that lawyers have more information. They're privy to private deliberations that could provide a real prism into whether Trump had the intent to commit a crime, whether it was obstruction, handling classified materials in an inappropriate way, or overturning the 2020 election, attempting to do so. In all of these cases we've discussed, and the Georgia case as well, every prosecutor is trying to figure out, can they prove Trump acted with criminal intent?
All right, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you.